Hello, friends. It is a sad week for psychology as we lost a huge figure in our history. Dr. Phil Zimbardo passed away last week at the age of 91. And I just want to read a little something from his obituary. Our beloved Philip G. Zimbardo, PhD, passed away in peace on October 14th, 2024, at his home in San Francisco, surrounded by family. An internationally recognized psychology educator, researcher, author, and media personality, Phil was professor emeritus at Stanford University. He is survived by his loving wife of 52 years, Christina Maslick Zimbardo. Both Christina and Phil have been good friends to PsychSessions, and we are honored that they each gave their time to sit down and have an interview on this platform. And so today we want to re-release Phil's interview, which took place in San Francisco at the American Psychological Association convention in 2018. This story is now kind of lore in PsychSessions history because the way this happened was just really interesting from beginning to end. So let me share this. First of all, I was at an event that I don't really know how I got into the event. I can't remember, but I keep good friends. And so I got in probably as somebody's plus one to an event for folks who were associated somehow with the APA convention. And it was a beautiful kind of cocktail event. And at some point, Phil Zimbardo and Christina Maslick show up. And at some point, I thought I'd like to interview them. And that's when I ran into Jane Hallinan. And Jane said to me, well, I can arrange that for you. And of course she could, because she's Jane Hallinan. Sometimes Jane, she just goes for stuff. I don't know. I think it's just because she is a dear friend and wants to do nice things for people, but also wants to put like two chemicals together to see what would happen. And so that's what she did. So anyway, by the end of the evening, Jane comes to me and says, hey, come over here and meet Phil. You're going to interview him tomorrow. And I thought, okay, I guess this is happening. I went and met him and shook his hand. And he said, all right, be to my hotel at such and such a time tomorrow. That's when it'll work for me before I have to leave. So it was going to be the morning because he had to check out of the hotel. I didn't exactly know what the situation was going to be. Usually we like to have a nice room and chairs and a table where we can sit across from each other. But I showed up the next morning by myself to Phil Zimbardo's hotel room, and he opened the door and we greeted each other, and I set up the equipment and we had a nice conversation even while I was setting it up. And then he was kind enough just to indulge all the questions I had. And I think you're going to hear Eric comment on it in the beginning. We used to do these long beginnings for these episodes when we first started. And so Eric gets to sort of narrate and preview the interview before you get to it. But one of the things that I was proud of, and I think Eric picked up on this as well, was, when people like Phil are interviewed, people ask them the same questions over and over. They get their talking points, and they should. I'm a big proponent of that. Know the story you want to tell it again and again and again, and in that way you can maybe have an impact. But I knew his stories, and so I am always looking for the story I don't know, and I really remember getting there together. At the end of this interview, it's going to be one of my best memories of Phil Zimbardo. I mean, I've seen him talk. I've had multiple conversations with him. Obviously, he is a huge figure in the history of psychology. But one of my favorite memories of him is his mobility was limited at that time. I was helping him pack up his bags, and I carried his bags for him down to the lobby and into the car. And we met up with Christina, who I didn't know very well back then. And that was it. We said goodbye. He was very kind, and I really appreciated that time together, and I am so grateful for the memory. So folks, here is a giant, Phil Zimbardo, 91 years old, gave us lots to talk about.
Hello, and welcome to PsychSessions, conversations about teaching and stuff. I'm Eric Landrum, along with Garth Neufeld, your podcast hosts. As the name implies, we center on conversations about teaching, but we often veer into other interesting topics, which is the end stuff. This is episode number 50, where Garth had the opportunity to interview Philip Zimbardo from Stanford University in Stanford, California. Now, before you hear the interview, please allow me to share some listening tips and some of my favorite moments. But even before that, let me encourage you to subscribe to us, to PsychSessions, that is, on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, because that helps us pop in their search results. Also, Garth and I wanted to let you know about an initiative underway that is sponsored by the American Psychological Association, specifically by the Board of Educational Affairs and the Committee on Associate and Baccalaureate Education. It's called the Introductory Psychology Initiative, or IPI. There's a lot going on with this. There's a number of great people across the nation working on this. It's actually being co-led by Garth and Regan Gurung of the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay. And for more information about that, the place to go is www.apa.org/IPI. Now, on to episode number 50. Well, this is actually a real treat for Garth to be able to talk to Phil Zimbardo, and we have to give an assist to Jane Hallinan because at the August 2018 American Psychological Association convention, Jane was actually the matchmaker that led to this being able to happen. So, Jane, we thank you, as always, for your enduring and endearing support of our endeavor here. I'm not so sure I want to give away a lot of the treats that are in store. I mean, Phil actually talks a lot about his background as a graduate student, as an undergraduate, a little bit about the neighborhood that he grows up in, his background, his parents, especially his father, and how the relative value of education in his household and some of the struggles that he had to overcome to sell, so to speak, the importance of education in his home. He talks about going into the environment of teaching in the classroom and how he got inspired by that and how those teaching moments then inspired research moments in his career. And so a lot of those stories you're going to know about the research side of it, whether it's the Stanford Prison Study or some of the shyness work or maybe the more current Heroic Imagination Project that you've known about. But there's all kinds of nuance and details that he talks about from his life that I just found fascinating listening to this. So I'm not so sure I want to give you the typical rundown that I would in a typical PsychSessions podcast preview. I think you're in for a real treat. And I want to give kudos to Garth as always, because, you know, Phil Zimbardo is a master storyteller, and he gets on a roll. He wants to talk about the nuances and the details. And Garth, to his credit, kind of steers him back into the teaching realm. And it's really fascinating to hear Phil talk about anything. If you've ever been to a convention and heard one of his talks, it's truly amazing to hear a lot about our own history in the world of psychology through his eyes and through his experiences and the people that he's known and collaborated with. But Garth did a great job of steering it back to teaching, and I just wanted to give kudos to my buddy on that. It's the beginning of 2019. Welcome to the new year. Welcome to episode 50, and welcome to this special edition of PsychSessions. Enjoy.
I'm here with Dr. Philip Zimbardo. Thanks for taking the time to do this. I appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me, Garth.
And we'll... You know, this always, we tell guests, this always feels weird to have a cold conversation. You've been kind enough to allow me to come up to your room here and have this conversation, but we're just going to talk casually. So
sure.
Anything that you want to talk about, we can talk about. But what this podcast is all about is teaching psychology. And you've been at it for quite a while.
Yeah, I actually started teaching when I was a Yale graduate student back in 1956 or 57. I was actually the first graduate student ever to teach undergraduates at Yale, in part because I took a course in teaching psychology taught by the chair, Claude Buxton, who had just written a book about it, even though he was a terrible teacher himself. And when we finished the course, I said, I presume now we become interns and teach. He said, no. Yale is not Harvard. Harvard has graduate students teach. We only have professors teach our undergraduates. I said, well, I was going to say I wasted a course then. And then what happened was, at the beginning of the term, one of the professors got sick. And it was a year in which they had almost everybody except the most senior full professors teaching introductory psych. So somebody got sick, and I was the only one available and ready. And it was really transformative. The moment I got up there, I just knew, God, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. I'm going to be a teacher of psychology. Wow. And introductory psych. And then I went on, I taught at New York University in the Bronx, graduate courses downtown. But I think and then I went on from there. I taught at Columbia, I taught at Barnard. And then from 1968 to, I guess, 2004, I taught at Stanford. And I also taught at Palo Alto University for 7 years, psychology for clinicians. Palo Alto University is a clinical graduate training program for professional psych. But I always taught introductory psych. In fact, for many years I taught, to make more money, I taught in the summer. So I taught fall, winter, and summer introductory psych. And the question is, how do you keep teaching the same course without it getting boring for you? Because if it's boring for you, it's going to be boring for the students. Mm-hmm. And so I have some ideas we can share about, how I maintain the freshness after 60 years of teaching.
Yeah, I want to get to that. Definitely. Yeah. I'd love to go back to Yale and to those early years. What did you set out to do before you realized that you wanted to teach?
Well, no, I was. You go to Yale in those days. You go to graduate school to become a researcher, and then you have to teach on the side to pay your salary. But virtually none of the major researchers, in fact, none of the major researchers taught very heavily. In fact, once you got a reputation, then typically you bought out of teaching. Mm-hmm. Or once you got a grant, then in those days you could get part of your salary to do research, and that meant you could ask for teaching remission. And then your money, they would pay somebody else to do it. But the point is, I always wanted to do research because I'm probably the last of the generalists in psychology. Meaning, I get interested in everything in psychology. When I get interested in something, then I say, I wonder what would happen if, and that's the magic phrase. And then it says, okay, well, let me try to answer that question. Someone recently sent me a list of all the topics on which I have published in psychology journals and on internet, and it's more than 40 different topics. Like affiliation and dissonance and terrorism and shyness and time perspective and evil and now heroism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, it seems when you have that many interests, it seems like it would be hard to be good at all of them. Right. I'm assuming you work very hard in all of those areas to try to get to the level of publishing and writing. Yeah, well,
some things I did, like for terrorism, after 9/11, people were asking the question, who are the terrorists? What motivates them? I was asking, what is the role of the media in promoting fear and anxiety way beyond what the terrorists were doing could do? And so I did, it leads to different kinds of research. So there's qualitative research, it's interviews. But for some things like shyness, I did many different kinds of research, cross-cultural research, laboratory research, interview research, scale development, etc. And that I did for maybe 10 or 20 years. And then, so I should mention, but just in passing, when I finished the Stanford Prison Study, which I did in 1971, the next year when I'm teaching psychology at Stanford to my introductory class, I remember beginning in an unusual way. I said, please raise your hand if you intend to be a prison guard after you graduate. Nobody. Please raise your hand if you intend to be a prisoner. Nobody. I said, why should you care about this research I'm about to present, which is all about prisoners and guards? And it's about college students like you playing the role of prisoners and guards. And then I said, however, I think the real relevance of this study is what are the kinds of prisons some people, what are the psychological prisons that people impose on themselves? And I said, I think shyness is a self-imposed psychological prison, because shyness is unusual. The unusual characteristic about shyness is nobody says you're shy. People say you're prejudiced, you're hostile, you're aggressive, etc. But shyness is self-imposed. You say, I'm a shy person, and therefore what? I can't raise my hand to answer the teacher's question even though I know the answer. I can't ask the boss for a raise even though I deserve it. I can't ask the girl for a dance even though I'd like to dance, etc., etc. And so once you frame it that way, you are reducing your ability to communicate, and you're reducing your ability to make the human connection. And that's what the guards do. And then you as the prisoner, once you say, okay, I accept it, then you lower your self-esteem. And so I said, isn't that what shyness is all about? And then at the end, some students came up and said, I still remember one, this is 68, Bob Norwood, an extremely shy student, said, oh, Professor Zimbardo, nobody's ever talked about shyness. I'm really shy. I'd like to help overcome it. And I said, to be honest, I know nothing about it. It was just a metaphor I was using, to make a connection between the prison experiment and the kids in the class. And I said, however, go to the library, get a reading list, and I'll give you a personalized course. He comes back the next day and says, this is before you could use cell phones to do research. He had to go to the library. And he came back, he said, there is no research in psychology on shyness. The only research is on infants and toddlers. And I said, how could that be? So I went and checked, and sure enough. So I made an announcement to the class, and I said, Bob Norwood and a few other students are interested. They've got me interested in shyness. I'm not a shy person. In fact, I'm an extrovert, as many of you realize. But I'm interested in learning more about shyness. So we're going to have a non-credit shyness seminar starting tomorrow. And 12 students came in, and I said, what is it you want to know? And each one asked a question. Are men more shy than women? What makes people feel shy? When you say you're shy, what are you focusing on? I wrote those down. And so I said, okay, here's an interview schedule. Each of you go interview 10 students. And the first question is, do you think you are shy now? Have you ever been shy in the past? If you outgrew it, how did you do that? They came back the next week. So it's about 120 responses. And the amazing thing was, about 40% of the students interviewed said, I'm a shy person now. It interferes with my life in many ways. 40% said, I used to be shy, but I've outgrown it. 15% said, I'm not a shy person. It's not in me, but I'm shy in situations. When I go on a blind date, when my mother makes me perform in front of relatives. And it turns out, if you add up those numbers, only 5% of college students at Stanford were not shy. So shyness is the norm. It's a silent norm. And I said, oh, well, maybe shy students in this class have friends who are shy. So then I made a bigger survey in my introductory class of 300, and we kept getting those same figures over and over. I gave it in Berkeley, gave it other places. And literally after a while, we gave it to more than 10,000 people. And 40% are true blue shy. Then the other thing that happened was shyness was much higher among Asian American students than Jewish American students. So they said, okay, we need to do a cross-cultural study. We need to go to Israel. We can only go to Taiwan because then you could not get into China. And sure enough, Asian students in Taiwan was significantly higher than Jewish students. So we developed a whole theory about it. And then students that I was working with said, hey, we know a lot about shyness. Why don't we set up a shyness clinic to help other students at Stanford who are shy? And I said, sure. Now, we did that, and we were 100% successful because we knew how to zero in. There's 3 ways to be shy. You don't have the social skills, and we teach you skills as if it was in a drama class. It's a cognitive impairment. You say, I'm too fat, I'm too dumb, I'm too unpopular. And we do cognitive behavior therapy. And the third is physiological. You get aroused, you blush, and we teach you relaxation techniques. So we were 100% successful. And then what happened was a clinical psychologist who heard about this, Lynn Henderson, came to see me and said, hey, would you like to move the clinic into the community so it's not just limited to Stanford students? I said, sure. And so she and I set up the Stanford Shyness Clinic, which is still going on now. She calls it social fitness training. And we're in Palo Alto University, which is, again, the clinical program I taught in most recently. There is something called the Gornosky Clinic, and they're teaching our shyness. They're doing shyness therapy. So for me, that's the thing I value most. I got an idea, put it into class to make the class more interesting. Students gave me feedback that I acted on, created a research program. The research program led to therapy, but also it led to, I wrote a book called Shyness, What It Is, What to Do About It. So the other thing is, all of my career has always been about not only doing research that I put into psychological journals or even books like Shyness, What It Is, What to Do About It, but it's really communicating to the general public in various ways, in radio programs and podcasts. And so.
Have you always been, maybe the question is, have you always been innovative do you remember being innovative in childhood in the way that you thought about these kinds of questions, interested in a lot of different things?
Oh, yeah, for sure. No, I was in, quote, a child psychologist, meaning I grew up in the ghetto in the South Bronx, Sicilian immigrant parents, uneducated. We didn't have a book in our house until I got a library card when I was 10 years old. And what happened was, as a kid, there were these evil guys who would come around the neighborhood and try to seduce kids to do criminal things, to break into a store at night, to steal, to take a package which you knew was narcotics from them to somebody across the street. And some kids gave it, and you got $10. I still remember. It was a huge amount of money. I mean, it's like, there was no job you could have, you would make that in a month. So you just walk down the street, give somebody a pat. And some of my friends took it, and some didn't. And I remember as a kid, maybe I was 9, 10 years old, saying, I wonder what's the difference between kids who give in to temptation, kids who can resist it. Fundamental psychological question, and I didn't have a good answer. I said, well, it seems to me from the friends I knew, it was having a loving mother who had a strong moral conscience, who would say, this is wrong, this is right, don't do this, okay to do this. And it was not till I got to psychology in 1950 at Brooklyn College, introductory psych, they said, oh good, now here's some place I can answer the question. The problem is, psychology in 1950 was the most boring subject in the universe. It was about rats running Y mazes. It was about students learning nonsense syllables on a memory drum. And I was a really good student. I graduated summa cum laude. I got almost all A's, except I got 1 C in my life in introductory psychology.
Unbelievable.
So at the end of that, I said, this is not for me. This is stupid stuff. This is stupid shit. And so I switched. I majored in sociology and anthropology. And it wasn't until senior year that a friend of mine, Jerry Platt, who was a psychology major, we were buddies. I was a sociology major. And he said he needed a partner for a research methods course. And I said, that's boring stuff. He said, please do it as a favor to me. I'll pay you back in other ways. I said, okay. And the first day the class, you replicated classic studies, only we went way beyond. Like you had to run 10 subjects, we ran 100. And we got the best grades. We always got A or A plus, and this was a really tough teacher. I still remember her name, Elizabeth Farah. Everybody else got B's and C's. And so I said, I'm hooked. This is what I want to do. So I did my whole psych major in one year as a senior.
What was it about that instructor or that course that changed your mind so much?
Well, it was creating knowledge.
Yeah.
I mean, it was not, the text, the reason I got a C was the textbook was boring. What they were talking about, I'd say that was boring. But also there was something called multiple choice tests. I had, when I was younger, almost a photographic memory. So on each of these items, many of the items, I'd say it's A if what you mean on the textbook on page 459. It's B if that's what the teacher said in her lecture. You can't mark two things. And I would go up to the teacher afterwards, and she said, "I'm sorry, but I said both of these are right and different." And she was resistant, and I was furious with her. And she said, just pick one. I said, I can't pick one because it's right if it's in the book. It's right if it's in your lecture. Anyway, so I just gave up. I said, fuck it. And so I took my C and I switched out.
Has that changed the way that you did assessment when you were in the classroom with students? So did you ever use multiple choice tests?
No, I used multiple choice tests, but I said, if you have more than one answer, write in the margin. But the point is, meant I had to read the thing. So if you just write in the margin why you think, or sometimes you think none of these are adequate. I said the test these are standardized tests, and then I would actually have to spend the time to read in the margin. I used to have big classes up to 1,000 students, but then I had a lot of undergraduate TAs. And I would train them and read them. If you could make the decision based on what you know, the undergraduate TAs would be kids who had taken my class early and got an A in the class. And if you can't decide, then bring it to me.
What was your teaching style when you were teaching those 1,000 student classes?
Oh yeah. So there's two ways to be a teacher now. You have a large class, and if you have a large class, you're typically up on a stage, and if you're that. Under those circumstances, you must be an entertainer. You entertain. The alternative is a seminar, small classes, and there you're a colleague. Now, virtually all graduate courses are seminars, but they're typically more advanced undergraduate courses are seminars. And it's a totally different phenomenon. So in a large class, you got, the smallest of my large classes was like 300, 500, 1,000. And you're up on a stage, and so I would do music, magic, controversy. So I would always have warm-up music. So when the kids come into the class, I would have music playing, and the music would always be, the theme would be a topic that I was going to talk about. So if the topic was memory, I'd have Barbra Streisand singing the way we were, etc. And then, I play the music, but also it just relaxed them. It's also the off cue. When I turn the music off, I start talking immediately. So the hardest thing in a big lecture hall is to get kids to stop chatting, and if you get up there and say, okay, we're going to begin, you're almost begging them to say, when the music goes off, I start talking, and they learn. That's the cue. Music off, right? Talking off. And then, so I have always done that. In fact, in some years, I would announce that I would teach I teach in a room at Stanford where there was no class before. And I would announce, are there any musicians in the class who would like to perform both 15 minutes before our class in this room and then 15 minutes into the lecture? My classes were like 90 minutes, so we had that opportunity. So that we had live music. So what it means is kids came to the class early. So when it was supposed to begin, we'd have 1,000 kids in their seats already because people wanted to hear the music. And it was typically musical groups that were going to perform in a coffee shop. And it could be somebody playing a flute. It could be guitar player, trio. I got in trouble only once. I had some taekwondo drummers, and then the drumming went through the whole building, and people, my colleagues came down and said, "No more."
How did you think of these ideas, like ways to solve? I'm guessing you looked at your students coming late to class and you thought, I got to solve this problem.
Yeah, no, it's all problem. Yeah, I want students to be in their seat when I'm going to begin. The last thing is students coming in 10 minutes late. They miss the opening. They don't have a context. And so what do they do? They either say, who cares, or they talk to somebody next to them, and then both of them are missing the next thing. So again, it's a little egocentrism. I want them to be focused on me. Mm-hmm. The other thing is controversy. That is, again, for the good students in the class, they would have read, so the assignment, read chapters before the lecture. So in my lecture, I can't just reproduce what's in the textbook for the good student. For the other students, they haven't read it. So often I would do several things. I would see what's hot in the news. And I would begin with, I'd have an overhead slide, saying, how many of you have seen this? Why do you think this is the way it's going on, and so forth? And then, or then I would say, for example, today we're going to talk about this topic, this Stanford Prison experiment. I'd like to have a debate. How many of you think, I want some of you to debate it's ethical versus not? Sideways, and then have a roaming microphone go down. Or how many of you think the results would be different if we had all females? Or then I would do. I would also do a lot of demonstrations. So, for example. I know, for example, magic. So for research methods, what do you want? You want a magician. So you check in the yellow pages to find a local magician, and you pay him a small fee, and he comes up and he does magic tricks, and the moment at which, the class says, wow, he shows how he did it. So again, research methods are, presenting ideas, that eliminate false consensus or false conclusions. And the other thing is I always have a lot of guests, because if you're a teacher, people are happy to come to your class. So there's always, if you're teaching human sexuality, there's always a local center for sex education. So especially topics about which I don't have time to get educated, you bring in guests. Or other controversy, I would bring in pro and anti-abortion, and they would argue on the stage. Or mind control. I mean, people who had been in cults coming and talking about their experience. So it's bringing into the class the real world in different ways. And then, because that's what, that's in part what psychology is.
Right. It's interesting. I hear that you're saying that in some cases, like the shyness stuff, you went from your students in your class out into the world, into the community, but you're also bringing the world into your classroom.
Both. Yeah. It's a revolving door. Now, the other thing is students live in a visual world. So I always, even years ago, always had films, videos, overhead transparencies. So I never depended on my verbal exposition entirely. And then later on, I would make it available. That whatever I presented would be, if kids missed it or whatever, they would have access to all the slides and stuff. And now would even be easier now with the way the internet operates.
Yeah. I noticed. Is that your wife?
Yes.
Okay, we can edit this out. But do you want to go? Do you have a few more minutes? 5 minutes?
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions. Can I fire some at you?
Sure.
One of the things that we're always interested in is what it was. You were a first generation college student. Is that right?
Yes.
So how did education? How did you choose to go to Brooklyn College? Was it
because it was free? It was free.
You couldn't have done it otherwise.
Oh no, not at all. my whole education from kindergarten, first grade through graduate school was free.
And were your folks pushing you like, this is a good idea, go get educated?
No, the opposite. They said, go to work. No, I mean, for many, except for Asian families and Jewish families, so these are Asian and Jewish are the same, education was important. For Italians, for Irish, for many other immigrants, education was irrelevant. Yeah, except sometimes it helped you get a good job. And so for my father just put, you go to school only because you have to. And when you're 16, if you have not graduated high school, you could drop out and go to work. And he was pushing us to go to work. And it was clear to me early on that what education did was it gave you a future orientation, a focus on, how you could make your life better in the future. And I know he and my mother just didn't have that orientation. They lived from day to day. Also, out of that focus on the difference between me and my father especially, I developed research on the psychology of time perspective, which I did in class. And now, actually, next week I'm going to Nantes, France, where we have an international time perspective conference. It's a biannual conference we had in Portugal, in Poland, in Copenhagen, and now in France. And I'm the grandfather of this movement. It's hundreds of researchers around the world doing research on time perspective, and artists, musicians. And it all started again saying, why do I think so differently than my father about the importance of education as a way to become future-oriented, to have a positive future rather than, just limping along, with an unpleasant present. So again, my friends who had Jewish parents were always pushing them, Asian parents pushing them, and so in one sense, I had no pushback. But the problem is, when I finished high school, my father said, "Okay, good. Now you got to go to work." I said, "No, Dad. I can make more money if I have a college degree." And he said, "Okay, that means you're not bringing any money in. Okay, so you have to be self-sufficient." So I worked. I worked as a concession boy in the St. James Theater on Broadway in senior year in high school and 3 years in college, selling orangeade, checking hats and coats, etc. And it was $3. You got $3 a night, and it worked. I mean, when I was going to Brooklyn College, I lived in the Bronx, commuted more than an hour and a half to Brooklyn College, which is the last stop, Flatbush Avenue. And then I went from there. I was on the track team. I was captain of my fraternity, president of my fraternity, captain of the track team. I would go from Brooklyn College to Broadway, work from 7 o'clock till 11, go home, be doing homework on the train, go to sleep, wake up, and do this.
What were you doing with your money? Was that money going into the pot with the family, or was...
that was self-sufficient.
That was self-sufficient.
That was paying my 10-cent subway fare, paying for if I needed a new shirt or clothing, et cetera, et cetera. So, no, I did... It was $3 a night, so it was like $21 a week. But it made me, in quotes, up, means I didn't have to take money from my family.
Right. And then just... after Brooklyn College, how did you find out about graduate school? Or did you get a bachelor's degree?
I got a bachelor's degree at Brooklyn College, and then I had a teacher, a young instructor, who said, "You're really a smart kid. You really should go to graduate school." And I said, "My father's never going to allow it." He said, "Let me come to dinner," and he explained to my father I could make more money, if I have an advanced degree. And so my father was almost embarrassed. Okay, we'll let you go. To get a master's degree. So I got a master's degree after 1 year. And my father said, "Okay, now you got to go to work." I said, "No, Dad, 3 more years, I get a PhD. My father literally said, "I give up on you. It's obviously you don't want to work. It's obviously you're lazy." I'm working my butt off, in graduate school. And so essentially I graduated with a PhD from Yale in 1959. I then taught at NYU in the Bronx, near where my parents lived. And finally, reluctantly, he said, "Okay, I can see that you are really working very hard and you're not a lazy guy."
When you were doing that, when you had this difference of opinion, you keep going to school and he's telling you to do something else. What keeps you going?
Oh, because I just knew it was right. I mean, I knew education was transformative. I mean, I could see it in my little Jewish friends. There were not Asian kids. There was one or two. But I could see in my Jewish friends that, we were all about the same. And then they got more and more educated. And I could see how they progressed over other kids in our, quote, gang, who didn't get well educated. And it was just clear that life is limited. Without education, you're going to have a second-rate job, and typically a boring job. And I said, no, life is too short to spend your life doing boring things. So it was really a high self-motivation. And then it was, what can I do to make this job as exciting as possible for me? And that is to do new innovative research that nobody's ever done, to teach in ways that nobody's ever taught before. And so it was a little self-focused, because doing so made it exciting for me, but then obviously it made it exciting for the research assistants I work with, for the undergraduates I work with, and then for the students, obviously. And then the biggest thing, one of the most important things I did in teaching was, about 20 years ago, I was invited to do a 26 episode course called Discovering Psychology. And I created the entire course. I narrated, presented it, and it took 2.5 years. It was really the hardest thing I've ever done. And then we had to shoot it locations all over. And I designed it then. It was really very future-oriented. Designed it so that it was in each program. It was 26 minutes. I had like 4 or 5 chunks, like 5 minutes, 7 minutes, because I realized as a teacher, I can't give up a half an hour. But, so it would be an opening thing with 5 minutes. It would be a visit to a lab for 5 minutes. It would be an interview with a famous psychologist. And so that's partly what made the series so successful. And it's still being used around the world.
Sure is.
It's online. It's now streaming. It's Annenberg CPB project. And it's now streaming in high definition. And so that, I think, probably is my most significant contribution to teaching psychology, because it's still used in high schools everywhere. And many psychologists I know said, I took your course when I was a high school student. Yeah.
Are you still enjoying your career and everything that you're involved in these days?
Oh yeah. So what I'm doing now, so I don't give formal lectures anymore. I sometimes am invited to give a model lecture in Psych 1 at Stanford. But I do Skype lectures with colleagues of mine who want me to Skype, half an hour, 45 minutes into their class. And if they're good buddies, I do maybe 4 or 5 a year. But I literally spend 3 months traveling around the world, lecturing on time perspective, sometimes shyness, very often on evil, but now mostly my newest project is inspiring and training youth to be everyday heroes. So this is what's known as the Heroic Imagination Project. And so I developed lessons based on fundamental social psychology and cognitive psychology, like how to transform passive bystanders into active heroes, into upstanders, how to transform people who have a fixed static mindset into a dynamic growth mindset, which is important for heroes to think that I could do it and get with practice, how to transform stereotypes and prejudice and discrimination into understanding and acceptance of others. So we have these lessons that I have developed, and each lesson is about 3 hours long. But it's all built around provocative videos, and we license a lesson for a small fee. I don't know, $1,500, but it includes a 50-page presenter's guide, all the videos, questions and answers, and then it transforms the class into we say hero squads. ideally a boy and a girl working together as a hero squad. So when the teacher asks a question, it's not the whole class raises their hand. The pairs share their experience. So a question might be, we show a video where a woman is lying on the steps of a railroad station at Liverpool, England, that I had filmed. And in 5 minutes, 35 people pass by. Nobody stops. They pass by within a foot of her. And the quick question to the teacher is, why do you think nobody stopped? Secondly, what would you have done? And then 100% say, I would have stopped. Well, what's the difference then, the teacher says, between being in a situation, looking in? Something called social norms. When you're in a situation, your behavior is often controlled by what other people do or don't do. And then we talk a little bit about social norms. And then it's like, have you ever been in a situation where somebody needs your help and you helped? Tell your partner who it was, when it was. Now, your partner's going to tell you, have they ever been in a situation where they didn't help? And how do you feel? So it's again shit. So it's very dynamic. So the class moves. It's a new way of teaching. It's really energetic. And people who do it just love it. But in addition to licensing the lesson, and you license it for 3 years because we update it every several years, I or one of my people I've trained has to come in and train the teacher in how to deliver it. Be sure that it's going right. And there's this relatively small fee for that. And our lesson now is in 12 countries around the world. It's all over Hungary in more than 1,000 high schools, in Poland, in Bali, Indonesia, in Iran, in Geelong, Australia, in Nijmegen, Holland. It's in Sicily, in the ghetto. It's really very inspiring for me. So that's my mission in life.
Yeah. Well, thanks for everything that you're doing. And from all the teachers who are listening to this podcast, it has been a pleasure to be able to hear a little bit about your story and how you're teaching. And I'm inspired. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, but that's the whole point.
Right.
If you're a teacher, your job is inspire your students to become, inspire your students to embrace your enthusiasm. But you have to show your enthusiasm. That you have to say, I love what I'm doing. I would do this with no salary if somebody simply paid. So we took care of room and board.
That's it.
Right.
Well, I appreciate your time. I know you got to get out of here.
Garth.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ciao.